Hello, welcome to Quantitative Literacy through Student Inquiry. I'm Greg Foley. I teach at Ohio University in both teacher education and mathematics, and I've been teaching the Quantitative Reasoning course 4 semesters. This next spring will be my fifth semester.
I'm Dipendra Budathaki, and then I'm a graduate student in math education. It's my fourth year, and then I have been working with QR instructors here at Ohio University since 2018 fall.
Okay. Amrit, would you introduce yourself, please?
And I have been GA for Monica and Dr. Foley for last 2 semesters, and I'm doing PhD. This is my second year in math education.
So, quantitative literacy through student inquiry. So, one way to structure thinking about the quantitative literacy or quantitative reasoning course is uh, to think of the projects and presentations and the engagement of students in terms of inquiry. An essential feature of quantitative reasoning is the interplay between the real world and mathematics. In a course like college algebra, most of the time is spent on the mathematics. And usually the applications and the connections to the real world are almost an afterthought. Or in a quantitative reasoning course, there's a deeper focus on the real world part of what you're doing. And that's new for students. The other thing that's new is getting the students to actually to think deeply about what they're doing and to think deeply about the connection between the real world and the mathematics. That they're going to get genuine information about the real world situation, not make believe numbers, not make believe data, but actual real data from the real world situation and connect that to the mathematics in an authentic way. And in the course we teach at Ohio University, statistics and modeling are key components of the overall quantitative reasoning course. The literature talks about 6 competencies. Linda Sun's uh, a Mathematical Association of America committee back in the 1990s started to develop this list of competencies, and this has grown. And the American Association of Colleges and Universities list essentially these. We've modified these a bit, and I think of the first three as being sort of the quantitative or the mathy parts of quantitative reasoning, that you're interpreting um, words, sentences, paragraphs, tables, graphs, diagrams, mathematical information that you have to glean and explain the information presented in various forms. This is what we expect our students to do. This is maybe the easiest or a first step in quantitative reasoning, reading a short article and making sense of all the information in the article. But then we're asking our students to convert that information. It's presented in a table and you're going to switch it into an equation, or it's presented as a graph and you're going to make it a table, or it's presented as a table and you're going to change that into a graph. So re-presenting the information. And of course, there's calculations. There's arithmetical calculations and more sophisticated mathematical and algebraic calculations, and statistical computations are done too. Now, some features that are definitely new for students, in addition to interpreting and representing, uh, is actually focusing on the assumptions. Can students recognize, make, and evaluate the underlying assumptions when estimations are being done, when modeling is being done, when data analysis is being done? It's like, what are the underlying assumptions about a t-test? There may be some assumptions about normality and so on. Now, we're not getting deep like you would in an upper level statistics course, but students begin to get a sense of having to recognize and state their assumptions that they're making. And of course, they're doing analyzing. And this again is the critical thinking that was mentioned in the previous slide. And then the communication piece, if they're presenting reports and so on, then they have to um, organize and contextualize and synthesize and present their thoughts and processes. And they have to do it using mathematical and statistical evidence. So this is what the course is about. So if you stop for a second, you say, well, what's the best way to test or assess whether students can do these 6 things? A traditional quiz or test really doesn't fit the bill. If you want to see if students can do statistical thinking, then you should have them do a statistical project. If you want to see if they can do modeling, you should have them do a modeling project instead of doing these teeny tiny baby um, activities that are typical of a freshman level course. They're doing bigger projects where they have to synthesize lots of different smaller pieces together. And so they also need help in making that transition because this is a very new thing for them. So the way we teach is to support that these new kinds of thinking. So we ask students to engage deeply in meaningful tasks. We also give them a social space where they collaborate with students, with their fellow students, their classmates, to process the ideas. And then as instructors, we need to probe into student thinking, to ask them, as we work with groups, to ask them the questions that we want them to learn to ask themselves. And we also need to create an environment of equity, respect, and responsibility. And this is one way to reduce the anxiety of students when they're presenting. So there's 3 types of inquiry that are in the quantitative reasoning course that we have at Ohio University. We start off with traditional problem solving where the problem is well stated and the students just need to come up with strategies for finding the answers. But then we move on and have them carry out a statistical study where they have to really come up with their own questions, state the questions in a statistical way, collect data, analyze the data, and report their findings. And they also have to do mathematical modeling where they, again, have to come up with their own questions and come up with a plan for carrying that out. So the way I have structured my course is to have some little tiny mini projects that are presentations only, group presentations of some problem solving situations that are not um, super challenging, but they get used to presenting their thinking. They get used to explaining. They get used to showing what they did, how they did it, and why they did it. So getting used to answering the what, how, and why questions is the main purpose, and to break the ice as far as making presentations to class. The first major project is the personal finance project that addresses financial literacy. And then as we move on to the next mini project on medical testing, it provides students with a structure of how to present their findings using tree diagrams and area models. So they get lots of support. There's only 2 choices here on the personal finance project. Everybody's doing pretty much the same thing on the medical testing project. And this is the first mini project where they do a presentation and then they have to write a report. The first major project, they do both the presentation and the report. And so they get some coaching on how to present, they get some coaching on how to write up a report. The statistical study is structured, but they can pick any topic that they want and come up with their own statistical questions. And then for the final modeling project, which actually counted 31% of their grade between the proposal presentation, the written proposal, the written progress report, the final presentation that was made during the final exam period, and the written report. If you add all those components up, it was 31% of the grade. So I've really structured to build towards this final modeling project as the capstone experience for the course. So the course is divided into 3 parts. Uh, the capstone for part 1 is the financial project, personal finance project. The capstone for the second part is the stats project, and then the capstone for the overall course is the modeling project. And they're actually working on their modeling project from November 23rd is when they did their, I used this final mini project to actually be their project proposal. So I wanted to show you just a couple of examples of student work. This is from an early project, right? This is their first major project. This was one of the nicer presentations on the financial project. The written report, one of the options was to do treasury notes versus certificates of deposit. And here is what our written report looks like. They actually had to turn in a spreadsheet in addition to their written report. And this is the spreadsheet from one of the groups, which shows what's happened here. Now, the rubric, the project report structure pretty much follows this same set of guidelines. So there's a cover page with a descriptive title, authors, course number, course name, date, an introduction, overview or abstract, problem statement, clearly organized, legible answers, calculation, analysis, what you did, explanation of how you did it, justification, why you know it's true, and then there's conclusions, um, a reference list, and then mechanics accounts for 15 points. So
And
that's
so I was asking because I'm interested in, because we're trying to measure quantitative literacy, but some students might come in, students come in at different levels. And so did you see a change in the quality of the reports and the literacy? Or so ideally you would see, right, like lower grades in the beginning of the semester, higher grades at the end of the semester if the rubric's the same. And so I was just interested in, was there an improvement in the quality and the literacy component of the projects through, from the beginning to the end of the course?
absolutely a huge growth from the beginning project. That's why I'm showing some of the beginning. This is like the best beginning projects. And if we had time to analyze it, we could look at some of the kinds of errors that were being made then. Now, the other part of this is the quality assessment rubric. And to be honest, I'm much more forgiving early in the course. And what I give students back is only comments and suggestions. They don't get a grade, a numerical grade, or I give them this information to say what you need to do is you need to correctly identify all of these. So if they look here and they see that they may, I point out several mistakes, they should be able to figure out that they're maybe in this emerging category early on is what I guess is sort of a typical kind of place where people are early in the course, are at the emerging or needs improvement. And then as the semester goes on, they move more into this proficient. And a lot of reports were in the exemplary range. The final reports, I think, were almost all A's and B's. And so, and maybe half and half exemplary and proficient. And here's some examples of, here's a final presentation of a project where a student was doing a road trip, and they created their own map. They left from the Cleveland area and went out to Colorado and Utah. The circles represented where they stopped for the night, and the little uh, hash marks or line segments are points of interest where they stopped. And they described all of that and how they chose their rent a car, how they flew back, the cost analysis for gasoline, the cost analysis for lodging, the cost analysis for food, uh, and the overall expenses. And so this was an individual final report, and this was what the presentation looked like. This one was, I chose because they ended up using a t-test, which is, we did not do any inferential statistics in the class, and this is the first time I've had a group that actually did a t-test. And then the other one that I thought was especially interesting was designing a stair case for Wilson Hall, and they used Google, or I guess it's just SketchUp now. It used to be Google SketchUp, um, and they did all the materials analysis. And so anyway, these were the, I guess, the two really standout reports. One, because they did the 3D modeling, which again was something they came up with on their own. They went beyond what was taught in the course. And the same is true about the t-test. Dylan, your question.
Yeah. So for both of these projects, I guess, what is the, I guess, like the units for the QR course that these projects are using? Because it looks like the financial part, but it seems that most of it is just add, like, arithmetic. Um, and so I was just for the final projects, what was kind of the criteria for using things in the course in the project?
Well, this does use arithmetic, and it uses the concept of rise over run, and it uses 3D modeling. So as far as what the content of the course is, the content of the course is that they learn to interpret, represent, calculate. Doesn't have to be super super intense. Like a t-test is a calculation that was beyond the scope of the course.
Okay.
And doing the 3D modeling was beyond the scope of the course. But they did a good job of uh, stating their assumptions, uh, using reasonable, you know, if they had estimations, the estimations were reasonable, that they used the right amount of accuracy, that they developed their conclusions based on quantitative information and critical thinking, that they organized, contextualized, synthesized, and presented their thoughts and processes. So this is the real content of the course, as I see it, is inquiry. In the there's problem solving and percents and recursion and proportional thinking, probability and statistics, mathematical modeling. So I don't care whether the final report shows that they know exponential functions or not. I'm more interested in, does this show that they've been able to present their thinking in a logical, systematic way, and use use quantitative thinking. So sometimes the mathematics they're using is something that they learned in middle school, but they're using it in adult ways to actually solve real world problems.
Thank you.
One quick comment, Dr. Fodek. I think the one of the competencies that has not been mentioned in those 6 QR competency is collecting data, because in this course our students, like, they analyze or they discuss like which will be the appropriate approach for collecting data in particular project, and then they implement their plan.
Yes. And that, I mean, the third unit of the course is really about statistical problem solving and developing a plan for collecting the data and then carrying out that plan is a big part of it. And a lot of students for their final project, I'd say about half, did a follow up statistical project. So they had a chance to actually conduct an entire statistical study, and then they conducted a second statistical study. We had one group do a survey and collected data from over 400 participants. Again, that was a new landmark. In the past. If students collected data from 100 individuals, that was usually the top mark for the class. So, but they uh, I gave them a little more time for their final project, and some of the groups did some pretty amazing things. That said, every final project had flaws. Maybe it was spelling. Maybe it was they didn't do their citations right. Maybe it was um, that the one group that did the wonderful staircase project, they did not include construction cost in their analysis. They did all the materials analysis in great depth. They actually used real measurements from a real building to design their staircase, but they overlooked construction costs. So some of them had some fairly significant flaws. This is a freshman level course, but it's setting them up to do the kinds of projects they're going to be doing junior and senior year in a lot of their majors. And so that's pretty cool, I think. Now, one other thing I haven't mentioned is the textbook is structured that it talks about conducting a quantitative reasoning project at the end of the first unit. And there's a lot of guidance on how to conduct a statistical study. And in fact, much of the statistics work is about designing a study and using information to make informed decisions and what are some of the pitfalls and biases in conducting a statistical study. So rather than the kind of content that would be in a normal introductory stats course, the focus is much more into developing the skills to actually carry out a study. And so in this, it talks about writing a project, designing and doing, carrying out the project, presenting your findings. So there's much more support for that sort of thing in the textbook. And there's also suggested modeling projects at the end of part 3 and part 4. But most students have actually picked their own final project on lots on COVID, one project on the Georgia Senate runoff. So a lot of times it's on current events of interest to the students. But they have to create a proposal both for the statistics project and the final project and get that approved before they begin the data collection or in some cases they're just going to the web to get the data. They might be going to state websites to get COVID data or something like that. So I think that the feedback that they get from their first report to help them with the second report is somewhat useful, but maybe even more important is to give them feedback while they're developing the report. And I think one of the reasons why the final reports were so good is they presented their proposal. They got feedback about that proposal, the oral presentation. They got immediate feedback. They incorporated that into their written proposal. They got feedback on that. They gave a progress report, and sometimes that gave me a chance to check in with some groups that really needed help because their progress report was pretty weak. And then they presented during the final exam period, and they actually had a chance to get some feedback there to make their final written report a little bit better. So they got multiple stages of feedback for their biggest, most highest grade final report, and consequently the reports were better. I gave them more time than I had in earlier semesters, and I gave them all these opportunities to get feedback.
So I think I did mine a little different than yours, that they submit that where they do their presentation and send me their report on the same day. Um, so they don't have that chance, I guess, for revision. So that's something to think about for the future, to maybe do those on different separate days so they do have the chance, because you're right, they do get immediate feedback. And it was fun to hear the other students kind of basically say, wow, that was really well done. One girl pointed out to the other, you guys killed that. And then they could compare it to their own and say, yeah, ours was good, but ours wasn't anything like that. So they sort of know right away. But no, I didn't give that separate time between. So I'll have to think about that.
It's usually just 2 days. So like if they present on Wednesday, I give them till Friday to turn in their reports, or
Turn in a report. Okay.
till Wednesday. So just a couple of days, but that,
Yeah.
and some don't take advantage of that, and some do, you know. But the point you raise, I wasn't even thinking of, but I think that's really important, that because they're presenting, you have a class of 30, maybe you have 10 groups uh, or 8 groups presenting. They see what the others are doing. And so I think that they up their game because they see what the other students are doing. And so that's kind of a sort of peer feedback, and not the way we normally think of it, but that they see their peers presenting, and you know, they know, uh, they recognize quality, and then they can emulate that quality. They say, oh,
Yeah, I think uh, if we motivate students to ask questions or give comments to their peers, like they sometimes come up with really uh, important comments or feedback. But
thank you very much for joining us at this year's AMATIC virtual conference. Thank you.